Hi, I'm Alicia, and for my library assignment, I read the book Infinite Uppercut, Volume 1. The story and the art is done by Alan Thomas. I don't know who published this book. I looked everywhere and I couldn't find who published it. The page length is 77 pages. It is a genuine graphic novel and not a compilation. Act 1 begins on page 1 and ends on page 16. Act 2 begins on page 17 and ends on page 27. Act 3 begins on page 28 and ends on page 53. Act 4 begins on page 54 and ends on page 68. Act 5 begins on page 59 and ends on page 76. The last page is just about independent and free comics that are printed on demand and for free download, so that's not that important. So, Infinite Uppercut takes place in the future, and it's about Meta and Beaumont. Meta is the Net Zoo of the Earth plane, and Beaumont is the Net Zoo of the Dark plane. And so their boss, Jenny Nitzu, Genie Nitzu wants to have their annual fighting tournament, which is called the Infinite Uppercut. So after hearing this news, Beaumont gets really excited because him and his team always wins the Infinite Uppercut every year. But Meta isn't all that excited about the tournament because Beaumont's right-hand man, Val Prius, always kills them before the tournament even starts. So I guess Beaumont wins by default. Genie Nitzu is tired of Meta always complaining about how he always loses. So Genie Nitzu tells Meta that either he wins the tournament or he's fired. Which means that he will no longer be the watcher of the Earth plane. Genie Nitzu also tells Beaumont that he cannot kill anyone on Meta's team. Beaumont doesn't really care because he still thinks his team is going to win. And so now they only have 3 months to get prepared. The first person who Meta asked to join his team is Raekwon. And so Raekwon doesn't even want to talk to Meta because Meta was supposed to keep his dad and his sister safe, but he failed to do so. And when Meta finally asked him to compete in a tournament, he was like, no way, I'm not about to die like my family did. And so, without Raekwon joining, he has to find more people to compete. Back on the Dark plane inside of Beaumont's tour bus, he tells Val Prius that he thinks that Meta is trying to recruit Raekwon to join his team. And so he tells Val to kill him. But then he remembers that he can't kill anyone, so he just tells Val to scare him instead. Later on, when Raekwon is walking, Val appears out of thin air. He has these basically dumb ciphers with him, who are brothers, and so as they're fighting Raekwon, they end up turning on each other because one of them wants to kill him and the other one tells him that they're not supposed to kill him. So they end up fighting each other and just completely forgetting about the reason why they actually came there. When Raekwon is back on his feet, he ends up fighting the ciphers and beating them. This causes Val Prius to call for their sister, and she ends up fighting and beating Raekwon. The sister is about to kill him, but Val stops her and says that he's not deserving of the same fate that he gave his family. So now Raekwon knows that it was Val who killed his parents, and this makes him want to fight in a tournament now. And so back on the Dark plane in Beaumont's tour bus, Val tells Beaumont that he got someone to fight for him. His name is Jupiter. Val then tells Beaumont that Jupiter did an experiment on an orphan girl in the airplane. Jupiter tells them that she thought all the experiments he was doing to her were VR games. So now back on Meta's Earth plane, he's still trying to find a team. The guy that's there next to Meta, whose name is never mentioned, tells Meta that Jupiter has joined the Dark plane, so he can't compete with them. He then tells him about the girl who Jupiter did experiments on, She has a great amount of infinite energy, so she'll be a great fighter. The guy then tells Meta that he found someone else, and right off the bat, Meta knew who it was. He goes by Dan Van Dam. This guy is not that smart and not that good of a fighter. Meta even said the only reason why Beaumont keeps him alive is because he knows that he's going to lose every time. So at this point, Meta is determined that he's going to lose, or worse, be fired. Then Raekwon shows up and tells Meta that he wants to compete. After that, it's almost 3 months later, and that's when they finally meet their last fighter. She goes by the name as Convy Kate, and she's well, cheery, friendly, and always playing her game. And so finally, Raekwon tells Meta that he doesn't care too much about the team because he's just competing for payback for his family. And so that's basically the end of the story, because this is only volume 1, so I don't really know what happens after that. But I thought it was a good book. I enjoyed reading it, and it's pretty funny. And so the goal of the story is for Meta to find a team so he can compete in a tournament and finally beat Beaumont and not lose his job. I feel like the conflict happens on Act 3, but not Act 2. Because that's when Raekwon finds out that it was Bob Priest who killed his family. And that makes him want to compete in the tournament now. I don't think this story has a solid story arc because the ending didn't end with a resolution because none of the characters had fought yet. So there isn't nothing to change yet. None of the characters really have a solid story arc because none of them changed. This was only the first volume, so I never really saw that growth or anything. I do feel like the story makes use of directional flow. I was pulled through as I was reading it. I could tell where to read first and now it wasn't confusing at all. I would most definitely recommend this to my classmate because I think it's a fun book to read. And like I said, it's pretty funny, so I think they'll love it. I would also recommend this book to my friend as well because I think he will enjoy it and get a kick out of the book just like I did. I don't have any other observation regarding anything else we might have discussed in the class.